They did not save everyone, but the Marine and K-9 saved what remained. He was not supposed to survive. The mountain knew that before anyone else did. Dawn came late in the high country, slow and reluctant, as if the light itself hesitated to look at what the night had left behind. Pale gray clouds clung to the ridgeline, dragging their bellies across the stone like exhausted animals. The air was thin, sharp, and cold enough to sting the inside of the lungs with every breath. Ethan stood still. He did not speak. He did not move. At his feet, wrapped in a thermal blanket darkened by dirt and blood, lay the body they had reached too late. Ash was already there. The German shepherd lay pressed close to the motionless form, his body curved protectively, his chin resting near the person's shoulder. His ears were low, not pinned back in fear, but softened, relaxed in a way that did not belong to duty. His eyes were open, alert, watchful, but there was no urgency in them now, only presence. Ethan had called him once. Quietly, carefully. Ash did not respond. The wind moved through the pines above them, whispering across needles and branches, carrying the faint scent of smoke from somewhere far below in the valley. Not fresh smoke, old smoke, the kind that lingers long after flames have died, soaked into wood and memory. Ethan felt it settle in his chest. They had followed the signal through the night, through loose rock and frozen switchbacks, through radio static and long stretches of silence where the only sound was the crunch of boots and the steady rhythm of Ash's breathing ahead of him. The coordinates had been imprecise, the terrain unforgiving. By the time they found the clearing, the truth was already waiting. He had known it the moment Ash slowed. Not stopped, not barked, just slowed. AK-9 trained for search and rescue does not slow unless something inside him has already understood what the human mind is still refusing to accept. Ethan knelt now, lowering himself carefully onto one knee beside them. The ground was damp and cold, seeping through his pants, but he did not notice. His eyes stayed on Ash. "Buddy," he said softly. Ash flicked one ear at the sound of Ethan's voice, but his body did not shift. His nose rested inches from the still face beneath the blanket, as if he were listening for a breath that would never come. Ethan reached out and placed 2 fingers gently against the side of the neck. He already knew what he would find. Still, he checked. Slow, professional, respectful. There was no pulse. The radio crackled faintly on his shoulder, distorted by distance and elevation. A voice called his name, asking for a status update. Ethan did not answer right away. He pulled his hand back and let it rest on his thigh. His jaw tightened, not in anger, but in restraint. He had learned long ago that some moments collapse if spoken too soon. Ash let out a low sound then. Not a growl, not a whine, a breath. The kind a living creature releases when it realizes that waiting will not change what has already happened. Ethan swallowed. "We're here," he murmured, not sure who he was speaking to anymore. The light shifted as the sun finally crested the ridge, spilling weak gold across the clearing. It caught on Ash's coat, tracing the line of his back, highlighting the dust clinging to his fur. It illuminated the blanket, the stillness beneath it, and the boots at the end that would never walk back down this mountain. Ash did not flinch at the light. He stayed. This was not the first time Ethan had arrived too late. The memory rose uninvited, sharp and vivid. The smell of burning wood. The crack and roar of flames eating through walls and ceilings. The heat so intense it pressed against his skin like a living thing. He had run then, too, towards something already lost. Different mountain. Same truth. Ash shifted slightly, adjusting his position so his body blocked the breeze from the face beneath the blanket. It was a small movement. Almost nothing. It meant everything. Ethan finally reached up and keyed his radio. "This is Ethan," he said, his voice steady despite the weight in his chest. "We have located the missing person. I am marking the position now." There was a pause on the other end, then a quiet acknowledgement. Ethan let his hand fall back to his side. He looked at Ash again. "We did not make it in time," he said, not as an apology, but as an acceptance. Ash did not look at him. He stayed exactly where he was. And in that stillness, in that refusal to move on too quickly, Ethan understood something the mountain had known all along. Sometimes rescue is not about saving a life. Sometimes it is about making sure no one is left alone at the end. And sometimes, staying is the only thing left to do. The night did not end when the sun rose. It only loosened its grip. The mountain exhaled slowly as daylight spread across the slope, revealing what darkness had hidden. Rocks slick with frost, pine needles pressed flat by boots. A narrow clearing shaped by chance and loss. Ethan stayed where he was for a long moment after the radio call ended. He listened to the quiet settle again, heavier now, as if the land itself understood that something final had occurred. Ash still lay beside the body. His breathing was steady, calm, measured. Ethan reached into his pack and pulled out another blanket, clean and dry. He unfolded it carefully, shielding the still form from the cold air. Every movement was deliberate, not because anyone had taught him this part, but because rushing felt wrong. Ash lifted his head as the blanket brushed past him. His eyes met Ethan's for the first time since dawn. There was no confusion in them, only understanding. "It is all right," Ethan said quietly. "I am here." Ash did not move away. He shifted just enough to allow Ethan space to finish, then settled again, his shoulder pressed close, his body forming a barrier between the wind and the person they had not been able to save. The waiting began. Up here, waiting felt different. There were no clocks, no traffic, no voices drifting in from another room. Time stretched thin and wide, marked only by the slow passage of light and the occasional whisper of wind through the trees. Ethan checked the perimeter, placing markers where they would be seen easily when the recovery team arrived. He memorized the terrain, every slope and shadow, so he could guide them back without hesitation. When he finished, he returned to Ash. The dog had not moved. Ethan sat down on the cold ground, his back against a boulder warmed faintly by the sun. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself, then reached out and rested his hand on Ash's back. The fur was rough with dust and ice. Alive. Ethan closed his eyes. The smell came first. Smoke, sharp and bitter, carried on a memory that had never truly left him. The crackle of fire followed, loud and merciless. He saw it again, the way flames devoured wood and glass, the way heat erased distance and choice. He had arrived then, too. Too late. His chest tightened, and for a moment, his breath caught. He let it pass. He had learned how. Let the memory come. Let it hurt. Let it go. Ash leaned into his touch, just slightly. It grounded him. "You stayed," Ethan murmured, not sure if he meant Ash, himself, or both. Ash's ears flicked at the sound of his voice. He did not look back. He did not need to. The radio crackled again, clearer this time. The recovery team was on its way, moving carefully through the lower trail where the snow had not yet melted. They would arrive soon. Ethan acknowledged the call and gave precise directions, his voice steady, professional. When he finished, he set the radio down and returned his focus to the clearing. Ash lifted his head as distant movement finally reached his senses. Not the people yet, but the promise of them. The shift in air. The subtle change in sound that only he seemed to notice. He did not rise. He waited. When the first figures appeared through the trees, Ethan stood. He greeted them quietly, briefing them without embellishment. There was no need for drama. The scene spoke for itself. Ash watched everything. Only when the team approached the body did he stand. Slowly, respectfully, he stepped back just enough to allow them space, his gaze never leaving the person on the ground. Ethan knelt beside him. "You did good," he whispered. Ash did not react to the words. He did not need praise. What he had done was not a task completed. It was a choice honored. As the team worked, the mountain remained silent. There was no applause, no relief, only the quiet dignity of care given too late to change the ending, but not too late to matter. When it was time to leave, Ash looked once more at the place where he had lain through the night. Then, without being called, he turned and walked to Ethan's side. Together, they began the descent. Slowly, leaving nothing undone, leaving no one unseen. If you are here right now, stay with us for a moment. Some stories do not rush to be understood. The trail narrowed as they descended, bending around stone and root, guiding them away from the clearing and back toward the world below. The mountain did not resist their leaving. It simply watched. Ethan moved carefully, testing each step before committing his weight. The ground was softer here, thawing under the growing warmth of the morning. Mud clung to his boots. The smell of wet earth replaced the sharp bite of frost. Ash stayed close at his side, not leading, not lagging, just there. They walked in silence for a long stretch. No commands, no reassurance. None was needed. Their breathing found a shared rhythm, steady and unhurried. as if both understood that haste would not change what had already passed. At a bend in the trail, Ethan paused. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the small item Ash had uncovered earlier. It rested in his palm now, warmed by his skin. A simple object, worn smooth by time and use. The kind of thing meant to be carried close to the body. A name was etched into it. Not loud, not proud, just enough to say that someone had been here. Ethan closed his fingers around it and let his hand drop back to his side. He did not look at Ash when he spoke. "You found this," he said quietly. Ash's ears shifted at the sound of his voice. His gaze stayed forward, focused on the path ahead. But his tail gave a slow, deliberate sweep, brushing against Ethan's leg. It was not acknowledgement. It was confirmation. The descent continued until the trees thinned and the trail widened. Through the branches, Ethan could see movement below. The recovery team had reached the lower staging area. Vehicles waited with engines idling, their presence a reminder that the world did not stop turning for grief. Ethan raised a hand as they came into view. A few heads lifted in response. No one called out. No one hurried them. Ash halted just before the clearing opened fully. He stood still, body aligned with the trail behind them, as if marking the point where the mountain ended and the rest of life resumed. Ethan stopped beside him. "This is where we go back," he said. Ash looked up then. For a moment, they held each other's gaze. There was no question in it, no resistance, only a shared understanding that returning did not mean forgetting. Ethan stepped forward. Ash followed. The team greeted them quietly, offering water and space. Someone reached for Ash instinctively, then stopped, sensing the weight of the moment. The dog did not pull away. He accepted the presence without leaning into it. Ethan handed over the item he carried, explaining where it had been found and what it might mean. The words were simple, factual, enough to ensure that the person who had died would not remain unknown. As the team took note, Ash lay down near the edge of the clearing, facing the direction they had come from. His posture was calm, composed, but his attention remained fixed on the path. Ethan watched him for a moment before turning away. He walked a few steps toward the vehicles, then stopped. The weight in his chest returned, heavy but familiar. He knew it would not leave him. He did not ask it to. Some losses stay. They are carried, not cured. Ethan turned back and knelt beside Ash, resting his forearm across the dog's shoulders. Ash leaned into the contact, steady and warm. "We did what we could," Ethan said. It was not an excuse. It was a truth. The mountain loomed above them, silent now, holding its secrets in stone and soil. What mattered had been brought down. Not a life, but a name. Not a rescue, but a witness. When the engines started and the team prepared to move, Ash rose smoothly to his feet. He did not look back this time. Neither did Ethan. They walked together toward the waiting road, carrying with them what remained, and leaving the mountain exactly as it had found them. Changed, but not alone. The road down from the mountain curved gently through pine and stone, carrying them away from the place where the night had ended. The tires hummed against wet pavement, a steady sound that filled the space where words might have gone. Ethan drove with both hands on the wheel. Ash lay in the back, his body aligned with the length of the seat, his head lifted just enough to watch the world pass by the window. He did not sleep. He did not pace. He remained alert in a quiet, watchful way that felt less like duty and more like remembrance. They reached the small operations building near the base of the valley just after midday. It was a simple structure, weathered by years of wind and snow, with a single porch and a flag that stirred slowly in the breeze. The place smelled faintly of coffee, dust, and old wood. Inside, the air was warmer. Ethan signed the necessary paperwork at a narrow desk, his handwriting careful and legible. Names were written out fully, locations described in clear language, times recorded without embellishment. Each line was a confirmation that what had happened on the mountain would not disappear into silence. Ash sat at his side, close enough that Ethan could feel the heat from his body through his pants. No one asked him to move. No one needed to. When the last form was complete, Ethan closed the folder and set it aside. He rested his palms on the desk for a moment, grounding himself in the solid feel of the wood beneath his hands. Outside, clouds thickened again, drawing a soft gray curtain across the sky. They left the building together and walked toward the edge of the lot, where the land opened into a wide field bordered by trees. The grass there was flattened in places, pressed down by earlier frost and damp beneath their boots. Ethan stopped near the fence. He reached into his jacket and withdrew the small object once more. He turned it over in his fingers, reading the etched name again, as if repeating it might anchor it more firmly in the world. "This belongs with them," he said quietly. Ash watched the object, his ears angled forward, his focus steady. He did not try to take it. He did not look away. Ethan slipped it back into his pocket and exhaled slowly. The afternoon passed without ceremony. There were calls to make, information to relay, details to confirm. Ethan handled each task with the same calm precision he had learned long ago. His voice remained even. His posture stayed upright. Only in the brief pauses between responsibilities did the weight of the day press closer. Ash followed him everywhere. When Ethan stood, Ash stood. When Ethan paused, Ash settled. There was no command given, no signal exchanged. They moved as if guided by an understanding older than words. As evening approached, the temperature dropped again. The sky darkened to a deep blue, and the first stars emerged one by one, sharp and distant. The field grew quiet, emptied of movement and sound. Ethan sat on the steps of the building, his elbows resting on his knees. Ash lay beside him, his flank pressed against Ethan's leg. For a long time, neither of them moved. Ethan thought of the mountain, of the clearing, of the way Ash had chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier. The memory did not ache as sharply now. It settled instead, heavy but steady, like a truth that could be carried without breaking. "I used to think being strong meant fixing things," Ethan said softly. Ash's ears shifted at the sound of his voice, but he did not lift his head. "I thought if I moved fast enough, worked hard enough, I could outrun the worst endings." The words were not a confession. They were an observation. "The mountain taught me otherwise," Ethan continued. "So did you." Ash turned his head then, just enough to look at him. His eyes were calm, reflecting the faint glow of the building behind them. Ethan reached out and rested his hand on Ash's neck, his fingers sinking into the thick fur there. The contact was simple, familiar, enough. Night settled fully around them. When it was time to go, Ethan rose and walked to the vehicle. Ash followed without hesitation. They drove a short distance to the small cabin Ethan used when operations kept him in the valley overnight. It sat alone near the edge of the trees, modest and quiet, with a single light glowing in the window. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and soap. Ethan set his gear down and poured water into a bowl, placing it on the floor. Ash drank slowly, then stepped back and lay down near the door. Ethan removed his jacket and sat at the small table, staring at nothing in particular. The events of the day replayed themselves in his mind, not as chaos, but as a sequence of choices. Each one had been made with care. Each one had mattered. Ash shifted slightly, adjusting his position, then stilled again. Ethan glanced at him and felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. They had not changed the ending, but they had changed something else. They had ensured that the story did not end in abandonment. Ethan stood and turned off the light. Darkness filled the cabin, soft and complete. Ash remained awake for a while longer, listening to the sounds of the night beyond the walls. The wind in the trees, the distant call of an owl, the steady breathing of the man who lay down nearby. When he finally closed his eyes, it was not in exhaustion. It was in trust. And in that small, shared space, nothing else was required. Morning arrived quietly. Light filtered through the cabin window in a thin, pale band, touching the wooden floor before climbing the wall. The air inside was cold but calm, carrying the faint scent of pine and last night's coffee. Ethan woke before the light fully settled. He lay still for a moment, listening. Ash was already awake. The dog lay near the door, his body relaxed but alert, ears angled toward the outside world. When Ethan shifted, Ash turned his head slightly, acknowledging him without rising. Neither of them rushed the moment. Ethan sat up and rubbed his face, the fatigue of the previous day resting deep in his muscles rather than on the surface. This was not the tiredness of exertion. It was the weight that comes from witnessing something final. He stood, pulled on his jacket, and stepped outside. The morning was clear. Cold air filled his lungs, sharp and clean. The valley stretched below, quiet and unchanged. Somewhere far above, the mountain waited, indifferent and unmoved. Ash joined him, padding softly onto the porch. He stood beside Ethan, shoulder aligned with his leg, his gaze following the same distant line. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and felt the small object there. He did not take it out yet. He only confirmed that it was still with him. Inside, he prepared a simple meal. He ate slowly, without appetite, more out of habit than hunger. Ash drank water and returned to his place by the door, watching as if the day itself might ask something of them. The radio crackled shortly after. The message was brief, clear. Instructions to follow up, to make contact, to close the loop that had begun on the mountain. Ethan acknowledged the call. He sat at the small table and removed the object from his pocket, setting it carefully in front of him. In the daylight, the name etched into its surface was easier to read. Still simple, still quiet. He spoke the name aloud. It felt different now, less like an unknown, more like a person. Ash watched from across the room, his eyes steady. He did not react to the sound. He did not need to. Ethan made the call later that morning from the operations office near the Valley Road. He stood by the window as he spoke, his voice measured and calm. He chose his words with care. He did not rush. He did not soften the truth, but he did not harden it either. There was silence on the other end. Then a voice. Ethan listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was only to confirm details, to answer questions, to ensure that the person on the other end would not be left with uncertainty. When the call ended, he remained where he was, the phone resting in his hand long after the line went quiet. Ash sat at his feet. Ethan looked down at him and exhaled slowly. That mattered, he said. Ash blinked once. They returned to the cabin in the early afternoon. The sky had begun to change again, clouds gathering low over the ridgeline. The air carried a familiar tension, the kind that comes before weather turns. Ethan packed his gear methodically. There was no hurry, but there was intention. When he finished, he paused, standing in the center of the small room. This was the moment he usually avoided. The space between one call and the next. Between what had been done and what could not be undone. Ash stood and walked to him, stopping close enough that their shoulders touched. The contact was gentle, grounding. You do not run from this, Ethan said quietly, more to himself than to the dog. Not anymore. Ash leaned into him. The words settled. They left the cabin together, locking the door behind them. The road led back toward the mountain for a short distance before branching away. Ethan slowed the vehicle as they approached the turn. He stopped. The engine idled. Ash shifted in the seat behind him, sensing the pause. He did not whine. He did not bark. He waited. Ethan looked toward the mountain road, the one that climbed back into memory and smoke and fire. He did not take it. Not today. But he did not look away either. After a moment, he placed the vehicle in gear and continued forward, carrying with him what had been faced, what had been named, and what would no longer be ignored. Ash lay down as they drove, his body relaxed at last. They did not erase the past. They acknowledged it. And that, for now, was enough. The road stretched ahead of them, pale and narrow beneath a sky thick with cloud. The valley receded behind the vehicle, folding back into trees and shadow as they moved farther from the mountain. Ethan drove without the radio on. Silence filled the cab, broken only by the sound of tires against asphalt and the occasional rush of wind along the windows. It was the kind of quiet that did not ask to be filled. Ash lay in the back, his body finally at rest. His breathing was slow now, even. The tension that had held him alert since the night on the mountain had eased, though it had not disappeared entirely. Some vigilance does not fade. It only settles deeper. They reached the outer edge of the district by late afternoon. A low building stood near the road, marked and familiar. This was where reports were finalized, where orders were given, where stories were reduced to lines and timestamps. Ethan parked and turned off the engine. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Ash sat up. Ethan opened the door, and they stepped out together into the cool air. The smell here was different. Concrete and fuel. Paper and metal. The mountain felt far away, though its presence lingered somewhere just beyond sight. Inside, the building was quiet. A few people moved through the halls, their voices low, respectful. Ethan greeted them with a nod and continued toward the office at the end of the corridor. Ash walked beside him. No leash. No command. No one questioned it. Ethan entered the room and closed the door behind them. He set his pack down and removed the small object from his pocket, placing it carefully on the desk. He stood there for a long moment, looking at it. This was the part he had once rushed through. Finish the report. Submit the evidence. Move on. Today he did not rush. He completed the documentation slowly, ensuring every detail was recorded accurately. The location, the conditions, the recovery, the name. He wrote it out fully, taking care that nothing was left ambiguous or incomplete. Ash lay down near the wall, his head resting on his paws, his eyes following Ethan's movements. When Ethan finished, he signed his name at the bottom of the page and closed the folder. He did not feel relief. He felt something steadier. A knock came at the door. Ethan opened it to find a senior officer standing quietly in the hall. There were no formalities exchanged, only a brief acknowledgement and a few measured words. "You did what you could," the officer said. Ethan nodded. "I stayed," he replied. The officer looked at Ash, then back at Ethan. He did not comment further. When the door closed again, Ethan remained standing for a moment, then lowered himself into the chair behind the desk. He rested his forearms on the surface and stared ahead, his thoughts moving slowly, deliberately. Ash rose and approached, placing his head against Ethan's knee. The contact was gentle, grounding. It brought Ethan back fully into the room. "Thank you," Ethan said quietly. Ash did not lift his head. Outside, the sky darkened further, rain beginning to fall in a light, steady pattern. The sound tapped softly against the window, rhythmic and calm. They left the building as evening settled. The air smelled of rain and earth, clean and heavy. Ethan paused beneath the awning, letting the sound wash over him. For years, he had believed that leaving quickly was strength. That forward motion was the only answer to loss. The mountain had shown him otherwise. Ash shook the rain from his coat once they reached the vehicle, then climbed inside and lay down without prompting. Ethan started the engine and pulled back onto the road. They drove as daylight faded, the world narrowing to the stretch of pavement illuminated ahead. Ethan's thoughts drifted, not to what he had failed to do, but to what he had chosen differently this time. He had not turned away. He had not hurried the ending. He had stayed. Ash lifted his head briefly, as if sensing the shift within him, then settled again. When they reached the cabin once more, night had fully arrived. Ethan parked and turned off the engine. He did not move right away. "This does not disappear," he said softly, speaking into the quiet. "But I can carry it." Ash's tail thumped once against the seat. It was not agreement. It was companionship. They stepped into the darkness together, the door closing behind them with a soft click. Inside, the cabin held them as it had before, warm and still. Nothing was resolved, but something had changed. And for Ethan, and for Ash, that was enough to keep going. The rain continued through the night, steady and patient, tapping against the cabin roof until it blended into the dark like breath. By morning, it had washed the air clean, leaving the valley quiet and sharp beneath a low sky. Ethan woke before dawn. He lay still, listening to the sound of water dripping from the eaves and the slow, even breathing beside him. Ash was awake as well, though he had not moved. His eyes were open, alert without tension, as if waiting for something that had not yet arrived. The radio broke the silence. The call was brief, direct, a request, not an order. There had been another report overnight. A location farther east, where the terrain softened and the trees thinned into scattered homes and narrow roads. A mother and a child. Ethan sat up, already understanding what the words carried beneath them. He acknowledged the call and ended the transmission without delay. Ash rose to his feet. They did not speak. The drive took longer than expected. Mud slowed the road, and fallen branches narrowed the way. The clouds hung low, pressing the world inward. When they arrived, a small cluster of people stood near a modest house at the edge of the tree line. The smell reached them first. Smoke. Old. Damp. Lingering in the air like a memory that refused to fade. Ethan parked and stepped out, his movements controlled and calm. Ash followed closely, his posture shifting the moment his paws touched the ground. His head lowered slightly, his senses sharpening. They approached together. The house was quiet now. Too quiet. Windows dark. The damage already done. Neighbors stood back, their faces drawn, their voices hushed. Ethan listened as someone spoke. He absorbed the details without interruption. The fire had been contained. The child had been found alive, disoriented but breathing. Taken away for care. The mother had not made it out. Ethan nodded. Ash moved past him without command, his body pulling forward with purpose. Not toward the house, but toward the edge of the yard, where the ground, dipped, and the grass lay flattened. Ethan followed. Ash stopped near a small fence, his body stiffening. He did not bark. He did not dig. He simply stood there, staring at the ground as if something beneath it still mattered. Ethan knelt beside him. The ground was wet, darkened by rain and ash. Near the fence lay a small object, half hidden in the mud. Ethan reached for it carefully, lifting it free. A shoe. Small. Child-sized. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. The truth settled quickly. The child had been carried this far. Had waited. Had survived. The mother had not followed. Ash let out a low sound, barely audible. Not distress. Not fear. Grief. Ethan placed the shoe carefully aside and stood. He walked back toward the house, toward the people waiting, and spoke quietly. He explained what Ash had found, what it meant. He did not embellish. He did not soften it beyond what was necessary. The child would live. The mother would not. Ash returned to Ethan's side and stayed there as the recovery continued. He did not wander. He did not watch the house. His attention remained on the space between what had been saved and what had been lost. Ethan felt the familiar weight press against his chest. He had seen this before. Not just the fire, the loss, but the split ending. The knowledge that one life continues while another ends, bound together by a moment that will never be undone. The child's name was spoken nearby. Ethan repeated it silently, committing it to memory. Ash shifted closer to him. Later, when the yard had emptied and the work was done, Ethan sat on the steps near the road. The rain had begun again, light and steady. Ash lay beside him, his body angled toward the house behind them. They lived, Ethan said softly. Ash's ears moved at the sound of his voice. But not everyone, Ethan continued. Ash did not look away. Ethan reached out and rested his hand on Ash's back, feeling the steady rise and fall beneath his palm. The contact grounded him, anchoring him in the present. You knew, Ethan said. Before I did. Ash turned his head slightly, his eyes calm. He had known. Not because he was trained to save, but because he was willing to stay with what could not be saved. When they left, the road felt longer. The silence heavier. Ethan did not turn the radio on. He did not need the distraction. Ash lay down as they drove, his body still, his presence constant. They had saved the child. They had not saved the mother. Both truths existed at the same time. Ethan understood then that this was not failure. It was reality, and facing it did not break him the way it once had. Ash lifted his head briefly and looked toward him, then settled again. That night, back at the cabin, Ethan stood at the window and watched the rain fall. He did not feel the urge to run from the image of fire or loss. He felt the weight of it, and he stayed. Ash lay nearby, awake, listening. Together, they held what could not be changed. And in doing so, they honored both lives. The one that ended, and the one that remained. The final morning came without ceremony. No call, no urgency, just light moving slowly across the valley, touching the tops of trees and the edge of the road, as if to say that time was still passing. Ethan stood outside the cabin, breathing in the cool air. The rain had stopped during the night, leaving everything clean and still. The mountain was hidden behind low clouds, present but distant. Ash stepped out beside him. They did not speak. They did not need to. Ethan reached into his jacket and removed the small object one last time. He looked at the name etched into it, then closed his fingers around it gently. It will be returned, he said softly. They will be remembered. Ash watched him, his eyes steady. The drive away from the valley was quiet. The road widened, the trees thinning as signs of the larger world returned. Houses, fences, movement, life continuing in ordinary ways. Ash rested in the back, his body relaxed now, no longer carrying the tension of unfinished work. He had stayed when staying was required. He had left when leaving was right. Ethan felt that difference settle in his chest. They stopped once, briefly, at the edge of the road where the land opened wide. Ethan stepped out and looked back toward the mountains. He did not flinch. He did not turn away. Thank you, he said quietly. Ash stood beside him, shoulder to leg, facing the same direction. Not toward the past, not toward the future, just present. When they returned to the vehicle and continued on, there was no sense of victory, no relief, only a quiet understanding. They had not saved everyone. They had not erased loss, but they had stayed. They had ensured that no one was reduced to silence or forgotten ground, that a name was spoken, that a life was acknowledged. That a child would grow up knowing someone had not looked away. Ash shifted and lay down, his breathing slow and even. Ethan drove with both hands on the wheel, his posture steady. Some stories do not end with triumph. They end with grace. Not loud, not sudden, but lasting. As the road carried them forward, the mountain disappeared fully behind them. What remained was not guilt, or regret, or unfinished business. What remained was presence. And that was enough. The road eventually disappeared into the ordinary. Traffic lights, storefronts, people moving through their days without knowing what had happened in the mountains, or what had been carried down from them. Ethan welcomed that. Some things are not meant to be explained to everyone. They are meant to be held. Ash slept in the back as the miles passed, his body loose now, his breathing deep and even. The work that had weighed on him was finished, not because everything was fixed, but because nothing had been abandoned. Ethan drove until the light began to soften, then pulled over near a quiet overlook. He turned off the engine and sat for a moment in the stillness. Ash woke and joined him outside. They stood side by side, looking out at the land stretching wide and open before them. No smoke, no sirens, no urgency, just distance. Ethan rested his hands on the railing and spoke quietly, not to the world, but to the truth he had learned. "We do not always arrive in time," he said. "We do not always change the ending." Ash remained still, his presence steady. "But staying matters," Ethan continued. "Bearing witness matters. Saying a name matters." The wind moved gently through the grass below, carrying the sound away. Ash leaned against him, solid and warm. In that moment, there was no uniform, no rank, no past failure demanding to be rewritten. There was only a man who had stopped running, and a dog who had taught him how. They returned to the vehicle and continued on as the sun lowered toward the horizon. The light followed them for a while, then faded. The story did not end with rescue. It ended with dignity, with presence, with the quiet understanding that even when nothing can be saved, something can still be honored. They did not save everyone, but they saved what remained. And sometimes, that is the truest form of grace. Some stories end without victory, but they do not end without meaning. If this quiet moment stayed with you, you are welcome to subscribe and remain here for the next story we tell, slowly and honestly. If you feel inclined, leave a single word in the comments, something simple like "here." And when you are ready, stay with us and listen to what comes next.